for the most part. I have always minded the business that paid me. That's why every time I seen Mendice's out with
Tamar Braxton's ex-husband exposes her medical report. She's on meds. The internet didn't just flinch, it collapsed. Timelines froze. Group chats exploded. And suddenly one name was everywhere for all the wrong reasons, Tamar Braxton. Because what hit the streets?
Just got word in real time. Some receipts were sent to us. We did promise the girl that we would give her anonymity. He knows who she is because he blocked her today. Put up the blocked receipt, Jess. That was fast. And, she got her receipts before. I asked her to send a screenshot of the DMs, and she did that. So let me pull up mine. So the voice note, we got him. Give me 1 second. He goes in the next text, like real bad. She says, you can have me. He says, I can't even front no more. She said, I'll let you have me. He said, we'll see. And then she goes, I will. She's from North Carolina, by the way. He goes, you be busy. And then she goes, so you don't want me?
This wasn't a performance clip, wasn't a comeback announcement, wasn't even messy relationship gossip. It was a whisper so reckless, so intimate, so radioactive that people literally stopped mid-scroll and said, wait, did he really just say that? Her ex-husband. A so-called insider moment. And a claim that detonated like a grenade with the pin already pulled. She's on meds. No proof. No context. Just enough to light a fire under years of unresolved pain, public breakdowns, and a marriage that never truly stopped haunting her. And the scariest part. According to online chatter, this wasn't shouted into the void, it was allegedly said behind closed doors, passed through whispers, and leaked just enough to do damage without leaving fingerprints. Suddenly old clips felt sinister. Old emotions were rebranded as evidence. And the internet did what it does best, it judged, dissected, and dragged a woman's most vulnerable moments into the spotlight without mercy. Fans are furious. Celebrities are side-eyeing. Mental health advocates are sounding alarms. And Tamar. Silent, the kind of silence that screams something is coming. Because when someone who once promised to protect you starts hinting at your private struggles, this stops being drama and starts feeling like warfare. And if you think this is just another headline, think again, because according to late night whispers, this story is only warming up, and the next reveal could change everything. The shock didn't come softly. It came like a slap across the timeline, sudden and humiliating, the kind that makes people check the date, just to make sure they didn't wake up in an alternate reality. Tamar Braxton's name started trending without warning, not attached to a song, not tied to a show, not even connected to a relationship rumor. It was trending because of a sentence. A reckless, half-whispered, allegedly off-the-record sentence that was never meant to be public, but somehow found its way into the bloodstream of the internet anyway. She's on meds. 4 words. No explanation. No empathy. Just enough to flip a switch and turn curiosity into cruelty. And what made it feel nuclear was who the words were allegedly traced back to. The one person who knew exactly how heavy they would land. Within minutes, the speculation multiplied. People weren't asking if it was true. They were asking why it was said. Because according to online whispers, this wasn't shouted in anger or blurted out during a heated argument. It was allegedly delivered calmly, casually, almost strategically, in conversations Tamar wasn't present for. And that's what rattled everyone. Because when information is framed as concern, it becomes harder to challenge. When it's framed as explanation, it becomes a weapon. Suddenly, every old clip of Tamar showing emotion was reinterpreted. Reality TV breakdowns were pulled from archives, like receipts in a trial she never agreed to stand in. Twitter threads popped up dissecting her tone, her expressions, her voice. TikTok creators stitched together moments from different years, claiming patterns, claiming insight, claiming authority they never earned. And behind the scenes, according to so-called insiders, panic set in fast. Friends started texting Tamar screenshots she hadn't seen yet. Family members reportedly urged her to stay offline. Not because she was wrong, but because the internet doesn't wait for context. Once a narrative takes hold, truth becomes optional. The rumor mill didn't just churn, it sprinted. Some claimed there were messages. Others claimed voice notes existed. No one could produce them publicly, but that didn't slow anything down. If anything, the lack of visible proof made it feel more sinister, like something was being passed around quietly, just out of reach, doing damage in private rooms while the public fought over scraps. What made this hit harder than your average celebrity mess is Tamar's history, and everyone knows it. She has never pretended to be unbreakable. She has spoken openly about anxiety, depression, feeling misunderstood, feeling cornered in relationships that drained her. That honesty once made her relatable. Now, suddenly, it was being twisted into a liability. People began asking questions that felt less like concern and more like judgment. Is she okay? Is she stable? Is she fit? And those questions didn't stay abstract. Fans noticed the language shifting. I love her, but I support her, however, that's how narratives turn. Slowly. Quietly. And before you know it, the conversation isn't about what was said, it's about whether the person being talked about deserves to be believed at all. According to chatter from people claiming proximity to the situation, Tamar didn't hear about the comment directly from the source. She heard it the way most celebrities hear betrayal in the digital age, through a screenshot, forwarded with no context, no warning, just impact. And allegedly, her first reaction wasn't sadness. It was disbelief. Because it's one thing to shade an ex. It's another thing entirely to hint at their mental health as an explanation for their humanity. That's when things reportedly shifted from shock to fury. Because if the claim was meant to discredit her, it wasn't just attacking her reputation. It was undermining her voice as a mother, as an artist, as a woman who has already fought to survive moments much darker than internet gossip. Meanwhile, her ex remained publicly quiet, and that quiet poured gasoline on the fire. No denial. No clarification. No, that's not what I meant. Just silence, punctuated by vague social media activity that fans immediately dissected like forensic evidence. A liked post here. A follow unfollowed there. Suddenly, every digital move was interpreted as a message. And when someone close to him allegedly hinted that the words were taken out of context, the internet wasn't buying it. Context doesn't erase implication. An implication is all it takes to permanently stain someone's image. As the hours passed, the backlash grew teeth. Mental health advocates stepped in, not naming names, but making pointed statements about how dangerous it is to weaponize treatment. Other celebrities began subtweeting about privacy, about boundaries, about how low you have to be to turn someone's healing into a headline. Fans organized comment floods defending Tamar, reminding everyone that medication is not shame, that seeking help is not weakness, that surviving is not scandal. But even with the support, the damage was already rippling outward. Because once the idea is planted, you can't unplant it. You can only fight the weeds as they grow. And here's where the story takes a darker turn. Late-night whispers started circulating that this wasn't the first time something like this had been said. That in private arguments, in past disagreements, the same line had allegedly been used before, not as concern, but as dismissal. If true, that changes everything. Because that means this wasn't a slip. It was a pattern. And patterns suggest intention. According to one source who claims to have been present for a tense exchange months ago, Tamar allegedly warned that if her health was ever used against her publicly, she wouldn't stay quiet. At the time, no one thought it would come to this. Now, people are replaying that warning with chills. By the end of the night, Tamar still hadn't spoken directly. No statement. No video. No long caption. Just silence, and that silence felt heavy. Not defeated. Calculated. The kind of quiet someone keeps when they're deciding how much truth they're willing to unleash. And then, just as the conversation seemed to plateau, one last rumor slipped through the cracks, almost unnoticed at first. A claim that Tamar wasn't just upset. She was preparing. Preparing to respond not with emotion, but with receipts of her own. And if that's true, then the question isn't whether this story is about to get messier. The silence didn't last, it never does. Because once a story like this hits a certain temperature, it stops needing confirmation, and starts feeding on reaction alone. And by the next day, reactions were everywhere. Not statements. Not interviews. Reactions. Subtle moves that spoke louder than press releases ever could. Tamar liked a comment calling the situation evil, then unliked it within seconds. Too late. Screenshots flew. Fans read it as a signal, not denial, not agreement, but acknowledgement. Meanwhile, people close to her allegedly started leaking just enough to shift the narrative without fully cracking it open. Quietly reminding blogs that Tamar has always been transparent about prioritizing her mental health. Quietly emphasizing that treatment is not a scandal. Quietly asking the most uncomfortable question of all: why would anyone frame care as chaos? And then came the supposed leaks. Not documents. Not records. Conversations. Alleged DMs circulating in private chats where Tamar's name was mentioned alongside words like unstable and emotional, always followed by the same justification: you know she's on meds. That phrase, repeated again and again, allegedly became shorthand. Not concern. Not compassion. A disclaimer. A way to invalidate whatever came next. And that's when the tone online shifted from shock to rage. Because suddenly it wasn't about whether Tamar takes medication. It was about how that information was allegedly being used. As an explanation. As a dismissal. As a way to control the story before she could tell it herself. According to insiders, Tamar was livid, not spiraling, not breaking down, but focused in a way that scared people around her. The kind of calm that comes right before someone decides they are done being careful. Friends reportedly urged her to let it go, to rise above it, to protect her peace. But peace becomes impossible when someone keeps poking at your wounds and calling it concern. And allegedly, Tamar said one thing over and over in private: I'm not embarrassed. I'm angry. That distinction matters. Because embarrassment leads to silence. Anger leads to action. As the day dragged on, more fuel hit the fire. A podcast clip from months ago resurfaced, where Tamar spoke about how people love to pathologize women when they don't comply. At the time, it felt general. Now it felt prophetic. TikTok ran with it, pairing the clip with dramatic music and captions claiming she tried to warn us. Twitter threads exploded analyzing her words line by line, treating them like coded messages meant for this exact moment. And the ex. Still quiet. Still watching. Still allegedly telling people he didn't say it like that, without ever saying how he did say it. That non-denial became its own headline. Behind the scenes, according to whispers, the situation escalated into something much uglier. A confrontation allegedly happened, not public, not filmed, where Tamar demanded to know why her health was being discussed at all. Voices were raised. Old arguments resurfaced. Years of resentment poured out in minutes. And according to one person who claims knowledge of the exchange, the response she got wasn't apologetic. It was dismissive. allegedly framed as frustration, as exhaustion, as if Tamar's reactions to betrayal, to disrespect, were the real problem. And that's when something snapped. Because once someone tells you your pain is proof of your instability, there's no coming back from that. The internet felt it instantly. Tamar's supporters went from defensive to militant. Hashtags tended to call out mental health stigma. Survivors shared stories about ex-partners using diagnoses as leverage in custody battles, arguments, and public smears. People weren't just defending Tamar anymore, they were seeing themselves in her. And that's when the story stopped being celebrity gossip and turned into a cultural lightning rod. Because everyone knows someone who's been told they are too emotional, too sensitive, crazy, the moment they stop tolerating disrespect. And medication becomes the punchline when people want to win an argument instead of take accountability. Meanwhile, industry whispers started getting louder. Allegedly, producers reached out to Tamar's team, not to drop her, but to check in. To gauge the fallout. Because controversy like this doesn't exist in a vacuum. It affects deals, appearances, opportunities. And that's when people began asking if this was intentional sabotage. Not to ruin her publicly, but to quietly destabilize her momentum. Because timing matters. And according to chatter, Tamar had been lining up new projects, new chapters, a cleaner slate. And then this drops. Convenient doesn't even begin to cover it. Late that night, another rumor slipped out, one that made even hardened gossip accounts hesitate. A claim that Tamar had documentation. Not medical records, but messages. Messages showing how often her mental health had been brought up in arguments. How often it had been used to shut her down. How often "you're on meds" was allegedly thrown at her like a MIC drop. No one saw the messages publicly. But the idea that they might exist changed the energy completely. Because suddenly the story flipped. What if this wasn't exposure, but projection? What if the real issue wasn't Tamar's health, but someone else's inability to control her anymore? By midnight, celebrities started choosing sides without naming names. Posts about weaponized vulnerability. Quotes about how silence protects the wrong people. And one particularly telling story reposted by someone who had worked closely with Tamar in the past read simply, "Healing people scare manipulators." That repost didn't stay up long. But again, screenshots are forever. And the message was clear. This wasn't over. Not even close. And then came the final twist of the night. A whisper that Tamar wasn't planning a statement. She was planning a conversation. Not with blogs. Not with fans. But on a platform where she could speak uninterrupted. Where she could set the record straight, without being cut into clips, or reduced to headlines. And according to the people spreading that rumor, what she planned to say wouldn't just address the comment. It would explain the dynamic that led to it. The patterns. The control. The moments behind closed doors that made everything suddenly make sense. And if that happens, this story won't be about "she's on meds" anymore. It'll be about why someone needed the world to believe that was the problem by the time the next wave hit. It didn't feel like gossip anymore, it felt like a countdown. Because once the rumor spread that Tamar wasn't preparing a statement, but a full, uninterrupted moment to speak, the energy shifted from messy to menacing. The blogs went quiet in that suspicious way they do when they know something big is coming. Fan pages stopped speculating and started waiting. And people close to both sides allegedly began making frantic calls, not to clear things up, but to brace for impact. Because when someone who has been painted as too emotional finally decides to speak calmly and clearly, the damage can be irreversible, just not in the way people expect. According to late-night whispers, Tamar wasn't interested in proving whether she takes medication or not. She wasn't interested in defending herself against a stigma she's already spoken about publicly for years. What she was allegedly furious about was the intention behind the comment. The why. Because if you've survived a marriage that played out on television, a divorce that bled into public opinion, and years of being labeled difficult for simply reacting like a human being, then hearing your health reduced to a talking point feels like the final betrayal. And sources claim Tamar made that very clear in private conversations. This wasn't about shame. It was about boundaries that were knowingly violated. As anticipation built, another layer of the story started leaking into the conversation, and this one made people uncomfortable in a whole new way. Allegedly, there were moments during the marriage when Tamar's emotional reactions were documented. Supporters weren't just defending her anymore. They were accusing the narrative, accusing the silence, accusing the timing. Because timing tells the truth when people won't. Meanwhile, the ex's camp allegedly started feeling the pressure. Subtle shifts appeared online. Old posts disappeared. Comments were limited. Someone close to him reportedly reached out to a blogger trying to clarify that nothing was ever leaked, that people were overreacting. But by then, it didn't matter. Because the damage wasn't about documents, it was about implication. You don't need to show paperwork to suggest instability. You just need to plant the seed and let the internet do the rest. And that seed had already grown roots. Then came the moment that changed the tone completely. A rumor, unconfirmed, but persistent, that Tamar had already recorded something. Not emotional. Not explosive. Calm. Controlled. Measured. The kind of tone that doesn't ask for sympathy, but commands respect. Allegedly, she wasn't planning to drag anyone by name. She was planning to explain dynamics. Patterns. The way certain comments were used in arguments. The way concern was weaponized. The way her openness about mental health became a liability in the hands of someone who knew exactly how to frame it. And if that's true, this wouldn't be a clapback. It would be a reckoning. People began revisiting old footage with new eyes. Moments that once felt like Tamar being Tamar suddenly looked like frustration boiling over after being dismissed one too many times. Fans noticed how often she was asked to calm down while others were allowed to provoke. How often her reactions were highlighted while the triggers were edited out. And once that lens snapped into place, it was impossible to unsee. The story wasn't about medication. It never was. It was about credibility. Who gets believed? Who gets labeled? And who benefits when a woman's emotions are turned into a diagnosis? As the night wore on, one final, chilling whisper made its rounds. That Tamar's biggest fear wasn't the internet. It was her child one day reading headlines and comments that reduced his mother to a stereotype. That fear, according to insiders, was what pushed her from silence to resolve. Because when privacy is violated once, it hurts. When it threatens your legacy as a parent, it becomes war. And suddenly, people understood why this felt so heavy. This wasn't celebrity mess. This was a line being crossed with consequences that don't fade when the trend does. And just before everything went quiet again, Tamar allegedly said something to a close friend that spread like wildfire among those paying attention. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just devastating in its simplicity. I told the truth about my healing. I never thought it would be used against me. That sentence reframed everything. Because honesty is only dangerous when someone else decides to punish you for it. Now the internet waits. Not for proof. Not for denial. For perspective. For context. For the other side of a story that's been whispered about, but never fully told. And if Tamar does speak, when, not if, this narrative will split clean in two. Before and after. Because once someone reclaims the story that was used to silence them, there's no going back. And the scariest part for everyone watching, the truth usually sounds nothing like the rumor that tried to bury it. Now don't blink, because this is exactly how stories like this slip out of people's hands. 1 minute you're watching from the sidelines, the next minute the narrative gets rewritten without you. This isn't just another celebrity headline that fades by tomorrow morning. This is the kind of situation that evolves in real time, where one comment, one clip, one reaction can flip the entire story overnight. And when that happens, the people who weren't paying attention are the ones asking, wait, how did we get here? While everyone else already knows. If you felt tension listening to this, if your gut